104.7 The Cave, Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens. After 101 episodes, we've actually figured out how to do a really nice
almost.
cold opening. I shouldn't have said anything, but Jay's
I
close.
screwed it up.
That's fine. Doesn't matter. It's dark side of the stream. Everyone just expects us to do about an 80% job out of 100. We're always getting a B- here on 104.7 The Cave. It is episode 102, Dark Side of the Stream. Jay's pick this week, the documentary series on Netflix called I Just Killed My Dad.
Yeah, nice, happy show.
Family values. Starts off with a phone call a kid makes to the cops in, were they, Louisiana, Baton Rouge?
Louisiana, man.
I just killed my dad. They're like, what? Yep, I just killed him. Okay. So the cops show up. He's outside. And to him, thought he could just say, hey, this is what happened. And they'd let him go.
Yeah, he thought they were just, everything was cool.
Didn't work that way.
Let's get the body out of here.
Didn't work that way.
Go back to work. Go back to
So initially, the cops take him in. They do an interview with this kid. He's like, yeah, he was abusive to me.
He's just chill.
Yeah.
Chill
no
guy.
emotions.
No emotions
at all.
Chill.
Which, if you've got a teenager, it's not very surprising, to be quite honest with you. But anyway, so he's in there. Detective does his thing. He asks him what happened, the situation, all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, he's abused me. He chased me into his room. I locked the door. He's trying to beat it down. I grabbed 2 guns to make sure I didn't miss. Opened the door. And as he ran away, I shot him and killed him. So to the cops, that's murder right out of the gate. It looks like murder, right? And the fact that he tried to get away and the kid kept firing, had 2 guns, so they didn't make, that's a big deal. So essentially, he sits in jail for, I think, like 6 months while the whole proceedings is going on. His bail set at like $1 million or something like that, something crazy. But then, because of a coworker, which, by the way, I know we've said this before.
How come we don't have coworkers here?
Well, that's what we do. Amazing. We do with certain dudes around here. You know who our close knit family is. If we see something, we say something. And if something ever happened to this guy, I would probably be one of the first persons the cops would ask, and I'd say, well, let me tell you, this is what I think may have went down. And I'm sure Jay could say the same thing about me.
Yeah.
But because of this awesome coworker, the ball got rolling for this kid, and in a good direction, at least, to try and figure out what the hell was going on, because it really, had this coworker not stepped up and said, hey, whoa,
it would have been done deal.
They would have locked away. This kid away.
Jail. Nobody would have heard about it.
And they said it many times when it comes to kids getting in trouble and the criminal defense system in Louisiana. It's not a good look for the state. Sometimes they get it wrong, but in this situation, I feel like they got it right. And we'll find and talk about what that coworker did for this kid next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio. Episode 102 of Dark Side of the Stream, discussing I Just Killed My Father. So we're back up to the fact that this kid's sitting in jail, facing a murder charge, killing his dad. It's pretty cut and dry case.
I was just going to say, cut and dry case.
I mean, really, the DA could have just said, no, done. Yep. No, well, this kid had worked for like a
nursery.
It was like a farm,
nursery.
Tree nursery.
Yeah, tree nursery.
And one of his coworkers finds out what happens and how he had killed his dad. And she goes, something's going on here with this kid.
Yeah.
The first thing that she talks about is how the dad had a tracker on this kid. And if he would stay in some place for like 30 minutes, he would literally call the dude's boss and say, what's my son doing? And
red flag one.
That's really weird.
The way it unfolds too is very good. Very good.
And so then she starts talking about how like she would have conversations with him, and she was like, he just didn't seem like he was all there. He would talk about, he'd say he was homeschooled, but then like I'd say, what's your birth date? And he couldn't really tell. Didn't know his birthday. Couldn't tell you what his address. He was like, well, what's your mom's name? Didn't know his mom's name.
Know his mom.
And so these were red flags for her. And so when this happened, she did a little bit of a detective work on her own to try and figure out what this kid's family was. And come to find out, she tracks down his sister. And did she find the wanted poster yet?
She called a friend who like does stuff like
this.
Like
the DNA project chick. Yes.
And so the DNA project goes, okay, let me use my resources. She kind of tapped into some networks.
Yeah.
Finds a
sister.
Finds a sister and finds a flyer.
Who then contacts, gets her mom involved. And the story basically goes as follows. This woman was married to this kid's father. He was extremely abusive. Finally, she leaves, gets a protective order. I mean, he beats the hell out of her, gets a protective order, and gets custody in Texas of this kid. Well, this piece of stained human garbage, the kid's father, goes to Louisiana, files another custody without telling, of course, the people in Texas.
Says the mom's on drugs.
This is just with the lies about this. Family court is there for a reason, but dude, the system, at least if you've ever been involved in family court or any kind of thing, just as well as I do, it's garbage. Now they're understaffed. They are overworked. They don't have enough money to do what they have to do. And I applaud the ones that do a good job, but so many times it fails these kids over and over and over and over and over. And in this situation, it did, because the state of Louisiana granted this kid, or this father, temporary custody. He contacts the police, and while the mother's gone doing something and he's under the care of his grandmother, they use a cop to go get the kid. Now, again, this was legal. They said he was kidnapped. They wrote these missing flyers for him, but guess what? It was legal. Now, again, the whole process never got to get finalized. He did get temporary custody of the kid in a different state, but they just failed and
just dipped off the map.
And in reality, the mother just gave up. And that is something
it is costly.
It is. Again, if you've been through any kind of situation like that, I'm sure you know how expensive this thing can get. And especially with someone that had literally been beat every day for years and years and years, she was probably exhausted and didn't have the resource.
Comes from a family of no money.
Yeah, I mean, there were like three of them were living in a trailer in the middle of Texas. Dude, like they didn't have money to fight this thing. So, and this guy was making $100 an hour as an engineer in Louisiana, had all this money. So he takes a kid, locks him up. About 6 months later, finds another woman who has a kid. And the cycle continues. Beats her.
Thankfully, that stepmom kind of taught the kid a little bit.
She sees what's going on with this kid, and she stepped up a little bit more than anyone else had. Taught him how to read. And we're talking, this kid's like 10, 11 years old, having to learn his ABCs. And it was gut wrenching. But you start to see a pattern with this man, his father, who again brings these family in. He starts beating her. Her son that she had before the relationship calls his dad and says, I can't be here. They take him. He's gone. And so eventually the same thing happens. She hits a wall with it and leaves him and gets her family involved to go get her stuff, gets a protective order, divorces him. And that's when he starts kind of spiraling out of control, drinking every day. The kid says he was drinking a case of beer a day, probably doing other substances, getting violent again, and pushing this kid to the limit, which he gets to. And we'll talk about next, Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio, Dark Side of the Stream, episode 102, discussing I Just Killed My Father.
Now, on the flip side, though, there was never, like what they're saying, there was never any proof of physical abuse.
Well, there was and there wasn't. The night of the shooting, he said he had been abusive to him, and you looked at the kid's body, and there were no bruises, no scratches, no nothing. Now, after the second wife had left and her kid had left, when they found out he had been in prison, they jumped to the kid's side immediately. I mean, they got him an attorney, which I want to talk about here in a second, and fought for him because they knew what was going on behind closed doors. She had been through the abuse herself. The kid had seen the abuse with his own eyes, and they both said, we will stand up in court and say this guy abused him, he abused us, and they pushed this kid to the brink. Again, the other thing the DA says, and Jay and I talked about this earlier at the beginning, she goes, I just saw no empathy in this child. Well, if you had been stolen from your mother at a young age, you don't even remember who she was, you can't count to 10, you don't know school, you don't know anything, you're locked in your room, no social skills,
you're a
nothing.
Person.
This kid was literally beat into not having an emotion because that was his armor. He didn't feel anything. And that in itself should have been a pretty big red flag for the investigators to say, look, he just killed his dad. He doesn't feel anything. He's not a psycho. Something else must be going on with this kid. And then the doctor, they get him out of jail. They let him go through psychiatric help. And the doctor's like, yeah, this kid was abused. He's hitting every check mark. And then at the end of the documentary, 2 months after they do the interviews, you see him and he can't even talk. He's just so upset. And you can see it finally start with therapy. It's starting to hit him. But it's so over. I can't even. I mean, this guy's going to be in therapy for the rest of his life.
Shout out to that lawyer though for taking the case pro bono.
Boom. No, that's the next thing I want to talk about. He had a pro bono, a criminal defense attorney who believed in this kid and knew what kind of mountain he had to climb to prove at least not to prove his innocence, but just get a jury to see why he did what he did. And he took it pro bono because he was also brought up in a very abusive and drug-fueled home and wanted to get this kid out. You can't commend this. I mean, again, there are good attorneys out there and there are bad ones. Yeah. He did it pro bono, but again, he's in a documentary.
Well, now he's getting his money. He's getting his investment back probably through this documentary, which is good for him.
Yeah, and he should. Yeah. But at the same time, he did a really cool thing for someone. Again, I don't want to get into other things, but different situation, different backgrounds, different upbringings, different ethnicities. The state probably would have just locked the door and thrown away the key. The other thing about this story is that I guarantee you this isn't the only one that's happening right now across the country. It happens all the time. And the system fails people. It fails kids. It fails wives. It fails husbands. It sucks so bad. And you see a story like this and it breaks your heart. Ultimately, the attorney gets a meeting with the DA and has all this evidence saying, look, I've got these two that are going to stand up in court for this guy. There's no way you're going to get a jury of 12 people to admit that he's guilty. You're either going to fail. I know there's a high risk, but I have all this stuff. And the DA looks at it and they say, look, he's right. This kid has been through enough. We don't think he's going to be a danger to society as long as he follows the rules and does probation and goes to counseling and does all the things that we asked him to do. He served his time. Yep. He was in hell for years and years and years. Let's try to give him a life, at least give him the path to where he can have a productive life. And they make a deal to the point to the point where after 5 years, if he does what he's supposed to do, gets his GED, keeps a job, does therapy, it's expunged off his record. Yeah. Because he did have to plead guilty, but they gave him that to where even though he did plead guilty, he doesn't have that on his record going forward, and he can actually do what it is he wants to do. He can even vote in a major election if he wants to. But props to that attorney. Props to that attorney for having his back.
Sing for a metal band.
Yeah, sing for a metal band. In about 5-10 years, you might be have an opening spot here in Springfield, Mo, bud. But props to that attorney for having his back. Props to the stepmother. She left him there, but again, what could she have done? For having his back and his older stepbrother, and props to that coworker, man. Like, had that coworker not said anything and stepped up,
so many of these documentaries you watch, there's a recurring
there's
theme.
Always
like one
hero,
one person who just did something or said something and that changed the course, man.
So if you see something, say something. That's the moral of the story here. We'll give it our reviews next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio one more time for Rip It Apart. Ooh, Dark Side of the Stream.
Okay. Wearing a Slipknot shirt. His mind is elsewhere.
I'm losing my mind. I did a little bit too much partying this weekend. Anyway, Dark Side of the Stream 102. I just killed my father. How many surveillance cameras would you rate this documentary?
3.5.
Okay. 3.5.
Average.
Okay.
Good little twist in
I
there.
thought, you know what? I thought it was good. I thought it was short. I don't know why they didn't just make it one documentary. It would have been an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Like it was stretched, yeah.
But whatever.
Whenever they stretch them, I take off a point.
Usually. Yeah, I feel like it would have been a solid 4. I'm there. I mean, it was a good ending, and the system didn't fail this kid when it fails so many people across the board all the time. But again, they can't be everywhere all the time. I get that. It still sucks. I think that's kind of a cop out, if you will, but it is what it is.
What's next week's show? Next week, your pick.
Another documentary on Netflix. This one is called Untold: The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist. It's about, you know what I'm talking about?
Football, baby.
Yeah.
Mateo, right? The white
Mateo kid from the Notre Dame football team.
The white kid, that's right.
And
I remember when this went down.
Pretty crazy catfishing story. It's kind of a heartbreaker, really.
This was a catfish one that made national media.
It really screwed this
whole
dude.
Catfish, like being a known thing.
Screwed this guy.
Oh man, wow! I forgot all about that, dude.
Big time. But it's going to be a juicy documentary. As always, you can watch these live on YouTube, Facebook Live every Thursday at 9, or listening to them as a podcast on our 104.7 The Cave app. I'm Mike the Intern. This is Jay Stevens reminding you.
I pointed the right way this time.
We watch movies,
documentaries,
so you don't have to. It's Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave.